najskôr, kým začnem, by som chcel trošku o sebe. Ja som vyrastal ako Michal v Afrike, v Južnej Afrike, v Zambii. A narodil som sa v Bratislave a po návrate späť do Československa som začal štúdium na stavebnej fakulte Slovenskej vysokej školy technickej v Bratislave. A angažoval som sa potom v 89. v študentskom hnutí a následne som hľadal prvé možnosti, ako ďalej študovať v zahraničí. Robil som si diplomovku v Holandsku a následne som bol, myslím, jeden z prvých Fulbright recipientov v Slovenskej republike v 93. Odišiel som do Ameriky. Tam som skončil druhý magisterský titul a doktorát som si spravil a následne som prišiel na postdoc do Švýcarska na ETH pred 20 rokmi. Mal som tu zostať 2 roky. To sú postdocy, hej. Stalo sa to inak a som tu doteraz. Tiež sa nechcem strápniť, tak budem po anglicky hovoriť o hydrológii, aby ste si trošku zapamätali niečo také zaujímavé, dúfam, pre mnohých miestností. So, the presentation will be a little bit a scientific journey through hydrology from statistics to processes in 3 steps. I just want to remind you, we live on a planet that is about 70% covered by water, but actually only about 3% of that water is usable because it's not salty. And of that 3%, more than half of it is locked in ice on the poles. So actually, even though we are a wet planet, we are actually really restricted with water. And this can be seen, of course, from satellite and many analysis of water scarcity. This I find to be a very interesting map because it shows where we have severe water scarcity for more than 1 month in a year. And this happens to be for 4 billion people. Think about that. Half of the people on this planet experience water scarcity. Okay? And of course, we attach that mostly to places, Africa and so on. But it's a more societal, broader problem than that. What I also want to share with you today is that from a plant perspective, this is a little bit different, this water scarcity problem. So if I'm a plant, of course, through photosynthesis, I'm trying to get carbon from the atmosphere to create sugars and the plant material for growth. And in so doing, I'm opening my stomata, and sort of the side effect is that I'm losing water vapor in the process, right? So plants are extracting water from the soil through their root systems, through the stems, into the atmosphere. They don't really want to do that, but they have to do that to create, to grow. So photosynthesis and transpiration, which is the process of releasing water back to the atmosphere, have global implications. This is another interesting data set, I think, where you see the mean evapotranspiration rates across the planet, and you see the tropics here jumping out where you have great conditions for plant growth. And of course, they, over the last decades, have been increasing. So the evapotranspiration rates have been increasing. Controversy, why is that? It's because there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, but it's also because it's warmer and perhaps even wetter. But this brings about, in my field, something we call a drought paradox. So that the high evapotranspiration rates reduce the soil water content that the plant lives off. So it's like, in reality, plants make droughts worse. We always think the other way around. When you have a drought, plants suffer. It's more than that. It seems that plants make droughts actually worse than they would be without them. From a climate change perspective, there's another type of problem here, and that is that we don't know how to make predictions. So you have probably seen many of these types of predictions. Here you have changes in precipitation into the future, different emission scenarios of greenhouse gases. And what we see here is that there's large uncertainty. Every line here is one model. And, there's anything from something like this happening to maybe something like this happening in those predictions. So how can this be? Well, it's due to 3 main sources. There is an internal variability present. So there's something about weather that's unpredictable. Today's weather is the outcome of conditions that tomorrow may be completely different, and this is natural. There's nothing you can do about that. But then there's also in predictions like this model uncertainty and scenario uncertainty. Model uncertainty is the fact that all the models are a bit different, developed by different groups, and some are better than others, and so on. And then there's scenario uncertainty, which are actually the emissions. We don't know what the future will be with regard to the greenhouse gas emissions. So what we can do nowadays, this is state-of-the-art research, is you try to partition this uncertainty. Something like this. You look into the future, and you see, into the future, the model uncertainty is the largest part that we don't know. When we look far into the future, it's this green bit, which is the emission scenario uncertainty, which we really do not know. But what fascinated me always was this orange part. Even though it seems small, it is highest in the very near future. So why is it important? Because this uncertainty, the orange one, is simply something we cannot reduce. It's a part of the natural stochasticity of the system. The other things we could in principle reduce. We can choose to reduce emissions. We can choose to improve our climate models, and we would by that reduce that uncertainty. So here we have another paradox. I call it a prediction paradox, which is concerning the orange bit. And think about what I'm trying to say here. What we do today matters for the far future, for here, but not for tomorrow. It doesn't affect tomorrow. And this is an inherent stochasticity which I try to address in my research group. So now very quickly through those 3 steps in my career up to now, and I want to give some lessons that I learned in that may be helpful for you as well. Step 1 was statistical hydrology, which I started from, where there have been many famous Czech and Slovak hydrologists in the past. And it's mainly empirical and data-based, observation-based. I would especially point out this gentleman, Vít Klemeš, who's actually very nicely representing this type of community because he was born in Brno, studied in Bratislava and Prague, and did most of his career in Bratislava, and then defected the country after 1969 and went to Canada, became the president of the International Hydrological Sciences Society, and is a very inspiring writer. If you look up his writing, it's pretty impressive. My formation was coming from this background. And so in Bratislava, we were looking at things like what is the, this kind of increase in a time series, is this statistically significant? How can we prove and show this? So it's a bit of statistics in there. In my thesis, I showed that all tests for these types of trends in data are affected by serial correlation. And this needs to be adjusted. And I proposed how such an adjustment should look. And then 2 years later, or 3, Zwaers and von Storch actually formalized this method in a paper that has a lot of citations. I was absolutely unaware that I was onto something here myself. Lesson 1, be informed. Trust your instincts like I should have here. And advertise your own work. I think what Václav was saying, very important. Step 2, in process hydrology, when I finished my studies in Slovakia or Czechoslovakia still, I knew I had a set of skills, but I really wanted to be able to answer the why and how questions. So this is what took me to the United States, and I studied at Colorado State University for a second master and PhD, and I worked on questions of landscape formation by erosion. So the kinds of questions we are asking is, why do we observe such rapid erosion rates in certain places? How do rivers self-adjust and create a certain channel width, for instance? Where does the sediment in these rivers actually come from? How do we know this material has a certain fingerprint, and how do we use that information? I also worked with riparian vegetation. How is it organized on floodplains? To give you just a few snapshots, For instance, we wrote some papers on river network structures. So nature creates these river network structures that are dendritic trees like this. So you can ask yourself, like, why don't rivers look like this or like that? Why is this dendritic structure actually the attractive one? And we showed that this has to do with sort of global and local optimization of energy spent, energy loss in the process of transporting water and sediment. Modeling became kind of a hobby. So these types of erosion rates and questions connected to them, we addressed them with numerical models, and we showed that actually these rapid erosion rates, which may be very high meters of sediment loss, can be simply caused by natural processes. We don't have to revert to any external influences, climate change, land use, and so on. They're natural. So I realized I found my niche here, combining hydrological process knowledge with stochastic methods and tools. So my lesson 2 here was develop a strong skill base. This is what you will be known by. But at the same time, enter new fields. Don't be afraid to get out of your comfort zone and reach out with your skill sets into other fields. Step 3. So then I'm coming back to ETH. I finished my PhD. I wanted to do a postdoc. I got an option to stay at MIT or go to MIT or ETH. I chose ETH. I kept on doing research, but I started reaching out to the community, scientific community. I think this is something that some of you should be thinking of, organizing conferences, editorial boards, be part of editorial boards, research editing panels, and so on. It's very important. I went, of course, deep into teaching. The question of how do you transfer knowledge with new methods, how do you make learning fun, a very important thing, I find. And then outreach, beginning with youth. That means not just university. You guys here, including myself, we're too old to learn new things. It's the secondary school kids that need to get the right information and knowledge at the right time. And that you can do by teaching teachers. So, for instance, now I have projects with Knust Kumasi in Ghana, where we're actually teaching teachers, secondary school teachers, to teach science to their schools. At ETH, I'm not going to talk about this. It's too much. We develop new stochastic tools for weather generation. Thanos Paschalis worked on this. We develop models for natural hazard simulation. This is in the valleys. We have tools to predict debris flows in the Susten area where the Ilgraben is. Some of my students working on this problem. This is connected to this prediction paradox. It remains an important scientific challenge that we have to quantify uncertainty. When you make predictions, you say what your prediction is, but you have to also say, this is the uncertainty with which I'm making this statement. My final one is connected to evapotranspiration, going back to those plants. This is perhaps the most exciting work that came out last year. Remember, I was saying that the plants respond to water stress. Here is an anomaly of evapotranspiration in summer 2003. Anomaly means when the evapotranspiration is higher than normal, that would be positive, it's the yellow colors. And when it's lower than normal, it's red. And what you're looking at here is the entire alpine range from France to Slovenia. Switzerland is somewhere here, if you would recognize that. And so in these types of modeling studies, we ran 76,000 CPU hours of computation here on the Euler cluster at ETH to show that, it's the plants at the high altitudes are all happy in this very dry summer 2003. They have enough water, it's dry, it's hot, no clouds, they transpire like crazy. But all the plants on the margins, including stream flow, are all negative anomalies. So they are suffering, they are running out of water, the rivers have no flow. So this vegetation at high altitude has benefited. You see that here, these are different colors, are the different vegetation bands of deciduous trees. The ET anomaly, evapotranspiration anomaly, comes from them being satisfied. So the drought paradox here was confirmed for the first time, and this was a paper that received a lot of attention in the community. So what I would add is that learning about the environment includes also outdoor experimentation and thinking. It's very fun, and I hope many of you have that opportunity to sense the environment, or in your work develop sensors or measure processes. And I already mentioned Knust Kumasi. We are also bringing weather stations like this into high schools in Ghana and all across West Africa, where the students then actually can see when they measure rainfall that this is done with this type of sensor and that they don't fear this data in any way. Lesson 3 is really a finding I made here at ETH, is that research is easy, but teaching is not. Learning how to explain things is not at all easy, something you should try to do yourself. And keep always a big picture of any of the small project you have in mind. So my summary is, if I speak of what I have learned from my career path, is try to become very good in a specific field, build your professional networks, learn how to upscale your skills. So think of why it is important for humanity. Communicate this, learn how to communicate this, force yourself to try to explain what your research is to a friend or to your grandmother. Act on your skill sets, do a startup, join an NGO, volunteer. Any of these activities will bring you forward. And learn new things, embrace change. And as a patron of the event today and the fact that I work with plants, I would like to remind you that plants rely on roots, no water, no future. So this is my scheme to end the day. I think we can think about this as being a motivation to continue to have these types of meetings in the future. Thank you.
Ďakujeme za poučný a inšpiratívny príspevok a znova máme čas na jednu otázku.
Tam sa ešte niečo naučil. To má prirodzene k sebe, viete, ten Slovak.
Show the first slide. The very first slide. This one? Yeah, in full screen. Yes, thank you.
Já bych měl jednu otázku. Nějak si hodně zaujaly ty stochastické modely a tyhle věci. Vím, že tam jsou, obzvláště když se jedná o komplexní systémy, takové ty jevy jako butterfly effect and to. Může se nějakým způsobem doložit, že tohle má spíš taky vliv na tu krátkodobou jaksi predikci a na ty dlouhodobé se to nějakým způsobem cancel out, anebo to má
to je
pořád?
Presne ten istý kontext. Tie okrajové podmienky, ktoré máme pri každom modeli, majú tento efekt a to je v skutočnosti, čo sa deje samozrejme aj v prírode a klíma teda je tá hlavná, ten driving force všetkých týchto procesov, takže to je presne popisujete ten dôvod, prečo krátkodobá predpoveď je nemožná. A toto je niečo, čo si musíme niekedy, ako zabudá sa na to, lebo tí ľudia, ktorí žijú v empirickom svete, na to pohodlne to proste zasunú do šuplíka, že neexistuje. Determinizmus riadí svet a vieme, že to tak nie je.
Ešte jedna otázka. Veľmi rýchlo.
Ďakujem. Otázka hlavne učenia. Vy ste dobrý učiteľ, mám aspoň ten pocit z toho, že aj žiaci alebo študenti vás veľmi radi. Máte nejakých vzorov alebo role models, podľa ktorých ste sa naučili vlastne, ako efektívne učiť, aby to ľudí zaujalo?
A si myslím, že každý takých má. Môj hlavný bol môj školiteľ, doktorandský školiteľ Jorge Ramírez na Colorado State University a hydraulik Pierre Julien, ktorý tiež bol teda výborný učiteľ. Ale musím povedať, že mám aj dobre... Učil som sa veľa aj od ľudí, ktorých som nechcel nejak kopírovať, lebo boli zlí učitelia. A to je, myslím, tiež potrebné na takéto...
Ďakujeme.